Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Linux and open source news show, where this is really a desktop environment focused one, because we've got GNOME and Budgie dropping X11 in their latest versions, either in stable or in alpha. We've got KDE Plasma 6.6 beta, we've got a new desktop being explored based on GNOME, even though it's still in the research phase, and we also have the release of Mint 22.3 with the latest version of Cinnamon. But we also have Wikipedia signing deals with AI companies and a lot more. So as usual, let's get started right after this message from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by SquareSpace. They are your all-in-one platform to create, publish, and manage your own website. They have really super easy tools to create your online presence, whether you know how to code or not. So they have what they call their blueprint system, which lets you pick from a variety of templates that are pre-built and will suit any type of website, whether you're looking for a simple blog, an online store, a video platform, whatever. All these templates are also optimized to give you solid SEO, and they even have a bunch of SEO tools that you need to make sure that your website doesn't end up in the last page of Google search results. On top of that, to go further, Squarespace has their own design engine to create your own pages. You can just drag and drop elements where you want them, and you can change the colors, the fonts, and just tweak the template however you want, or you can automate all of this. And once you have something you like, you can add extra features like creating your own online shop with a payment system that handles credit cards, PayPal, Apple Pay, and more. You can even design your own logo from Squarespace and book your own domain name. So check out squarespace.com/thelinuxexperiment, or just click the link in the description and you'll get 10% off your first website or domain purchase. So Budgie 10.10 was released this week, and this is the first version to go Wayland only. It is also the very last version of Budgie 10. It is now in maintenance mode, so bug fixes and security fixes only, as the team now focuses on Budgie 11. So the big change for 10.10 is, of course, just the move to Wayland. They reused some components that were already available out there to make that transition a bit easier. For example, they picked stuff from Sway. They recommend using a WL Roots-based compositor with Budgie 10.10. They specifically recommend LabWC because they developed a bridge for that automatically configures it with good defaults, but other compositors can be used, of course, and distros will just get to pick whatever they want to ship Budgie with. There are a few other updates to the desktop itself, notably to its applets, but the main goal of this version is the Wayland transition. Also, Budgie 11 is now the focus of the team, and they decided to go with Qt as the framework to build this entirely new desktop. They had looked at the Enlightenment Foundation libraries for a while, but Wayland support just wasn't there, and they don't want to keep using GNOME technologies or GTK, so they're gonna go with Qt 6 and Kirigami for their applications. They already have some amount of code running in production right now based on Qt 6, so this time it's not just we're looking at this library but then nothing happens. This time they're actually working on it and they already have working code. They will try to build a Budgie platform and a Budgie desktop that is based on that platform. They will reuse some existing stuff like parts of the KDE frameworks, and they also want to improve how they communicate on that work, sharing smaller updates more often instead of big detailed blog posts every quarter or so as they did before. Now, I think that's really interesting stuff. I do hope they find a specific concept for Budgie 11. Budgie was never a bad choice at all. I actually used it for a while back when I started this channel. I just never felt it offered something super specific compared to just adding a few extensions to GNOME or just tweaking a KDE desktop. Maybe with Budgie 11 they'll have a specific vision, they'll have a specific look and feel, they'll have a specific target for the desktop. In the meantime, 10.10 is there, it works really well from what I've read, and also, well, if you like Budgie, then that's what you're gonna use. I do like desktop environments. I never feel that there's too much choice in that space, because choice is good in that regard. If you don't like it, don't use it, but if you do like it, then you have it. And honestly, newcomers are never really baffled by this. They just go with the major ones. It's either Mint, GNOME, or KDE, so having other desktops out there like Budgie, I don't think really hurts the Linux ecosystem. Now, the first alpha of GNOME 50 was released, and of course it confirms what we already knew. GNOME 50 will indeed drop X11 support entirely. This alpha removed the entire X11 backend from Mutter, which is the window manager and compositor, meaning you're just not going to be able to run a GNOME X11 session at all. You already couldn't start one from GDM, but you could use another login manager to try and start an X11 session of GNOME by tweaking a few things. In GNOME 50, that will just no longer be the case. Of course, they're keeping X Wayland, so you can still run any program you want, any game you want, and of course that's not all that's in GNOME 50. For example, Mutter improves X Wayland support, notably scaling of applications, it improves tiled monitor support, it also fixes crashes, and a bunch more. The entire GNOME shell also got its alpha, and there's a lot of stuff in the desktop in its entirety. There's initial support for session restore and save, there's a new service to start headless remote desktop sessions, Nautilus now lets you check multiple file types in the search filters, which was kind of annoying when it didn't have that before. It has a better batch rename pop-up, Nautilus also uses less RAM, the settings app comes with improvements to display color calibration, GNOME Web lets you hide cookie banners on websites, the Papers PDF reader has a better UI for annotations, Calendar now also better supports screen readers and got some nice UI improvements, the System Monitor got more info about disks and RAM usage, and GNOME also improved how you resume a session after you suspended it when using NVIDIA hardware. It also improves ambient light sensor support, among a lot of other changes. So this is going to be a pretty packed release, and of course them dropping X11 is not a surprise. They said they would do it. Sometimes they push those things back a little bit. This time it looks like they're not, so X11 is gone from GNOME, it's gone from Budgie, it will be gone from the Plasma desktop as well in 2027, although Plasma apps will still support X11 sessions if you want to run them on other desktops. We also have Mint finalizing the experimental Wayland session. I would expect them to make it the default in the next major version of Mint later down this year. Basically, only Mate and XFCE really, and maybe LXQt, remain with X11 support, and I wouldn't be surprised if they moved away from that a bit later than others, but they're just going to do it as well. So at some point, you're just going to have to rely on a tiling window manager if you want to keep going with X11. I would say around 2028, 2029, I would be surprised if any major desktop environment still supported X11. KDE Plasma 6.6 got its beta ahead of the mid-February stable release date. There are a lot of changes in there. One of the big ones is the replacement of SDDM, the login manager, by Plasma login manager, which we've talked about recently. It's based, of course, on SDDM, as far as I understand it, but it does integrate a lot more tightly with the KDE desktop, with a lot of usability issues from SDDM being solved in there, notably with input method, with keyboard layouts, with brightness controls, and stuff like that. They're also adding a new virtual keyboard in KDE Plasma to replace the previous one. They also have an OEM setup wizard, so distros can decide to use that instead of adding their own, and KDE can rely on it for their own KDE Linux distro. You can also now create your own global themes straight from KDE settings based on your current Plasma config. You can scan a QR code to connect to a Wi-Fi network. You can set a skin tone filter in the emoji selector so you don't always have to scroll past plenty of emojis you would not use. And there are plenty of small changes to the applets and widgets that you can use to customize your desktop. On top of that, the XDG portal dialogues were refined visually, Kirigami apps got a nicer style for lists and toolbars, so they look closer to non-Kirigami apps. You'll also be able to configure the contrast and intensity of the frames that outline all the panels, all the windows, all the lists, and all the other UI elements that are used in KDE applications. Slow key support is here in Wayland now as well. The zoom effect can now always center on the pointer. There's a new grayscale mode. There's the ability to reduce animations using the XDG standard. There's OCR support in the screenshot tool. Screen recordings can now exclude certain windows. There's a USB portal for sandboxed applications. There's support for ambient light sensors. You can install fonts from Discover if your distro supports that. There's better screen mirroring support on Wayland. There's X11 rotate and resize emulation and fixes for performance issues on Wayland as well. This looks like a gigantic release, to be honest, so of course you can expect a dedicated video in February when the stable version releases. And still on desktop environments, there's a new concept being worked on as well, called Gyesme or Gyesme. I have no idea how you're supposed to pronounce that. This is a downstream of GNOME, so something using GNOME as the base, but revamping it to have as minimal a core as possible with fewer dependencies than GNOME and being highly modular, mostly based on extensions. It is not a fork of GNOME, by the way. They don't want to fork GNOME if they can avoid it, but of course, if their exploration of what is doable falls short, they might fork some components of GNOME. This is not a usable desktop or anything, it's basically just vaporware right now, it's a research phase project. What they want to do is basically have the smallest GNOME core possible and have opt-in complexity, optional features that you can tack on, and they're looking at extensions to support that. It's not extremely clear what that means yet, because there is no mockup, there are no renders, there's no code that you can try right now, and their description sounds like GNOME. It's a minimal set of default and options, and everything you add on top of that is extensions. So I'm not sure what the point here is, but they're also looking at making GNOME more independent from systemd to limit hard dependencies on anything, so more distros could adopt the desktop, so maybe that's the goal. Now, as I said, currently it is just an exploration. They just announced that they were starting to look at that stuff, so it is basically vaporware. They're not the first ones to try and build a GNOME desktop with extensions. Most people who tried doing that just gave up or are extremely outdated in the GNOME version that they ship. For example, Pop! OS just decided to build their own desktop from scratch instead of relying on GNOME extensions because they're not really stable from one version to another. Ubuntu still relies on that, but they have a much bigger team. Zorin OS decides to use extensions, but they are generally one or two versions of GNOME behind what is current. So we'll see what it amounts to, if it amounts to anything, but I thought I would mention it because a new desktop potentially is always interesting. It looks like Wikipedia is going to get its due, at least from certain companies. They have signed deals with Microsoft, with Meta, with Perplexity, with Amazon, with Mistral, and they already had one with Google. And those deals are to ensure that these companies pay for access to Wikipedia, specifically for training their AI chatbots. Those companies usually just pilfered the website, the public website, which meant that they tended to overload the infrastructure with their scraping bots and they didn't contribute anything to support that infrastructure. So now that they have deals in place, this should no longer happen, which is good, but also we don't know how much they're paying for this, so let's hope it is enough. Like people from Wikipedia put it, the bulk of the funding for this is individual donors, and these people aren't supporting Wikipedia to subsidize big AI companies as they're smashing Wikipedia servers day after day. So these companies have to use the right API and the right access to Wikipedia, and in doing so, they have to pay their fair share. It's good to see that happening. My big concern with AI is first the quality of what those models put out, because it's generally kind of trash, but also the ethical problem that they're just taking everything without authorization, copyright respect, or licensing respect. If they start paying for access to this data, then that's one big concern I no longer have on these technologies. Now they just need to start paying for the rest of the internet, which I don't think will ever happen. Now, Linux Mint 22.3 was also released this week. It is still based on Ubuntu 24.04 LTS. They always stick to those LTS releases. It brings Cinnamon 6.6. I made a dedicated video on that new version of the distro. You can go check it out if you haven't already. But the gist of it is you have a new system information tool that gives you a lot more info that helps you troubleshoot your system or get help online. You have a new system administration tool as well. Currently, it only handles some grub options, but in the future, I'm sure they'll add other modules to it. You also have per app indicators in the panel, so you can be a bit more modular when customizing things. You have a brand new menu that you can completely customize, resize, and tweak to your liking. You can set night light to be always on. You can pause snapshots in the backup app, Timeshift. You can pause file operations in the file manager of Mint. They added support for their own symbolic icons as well, so they don't depend on Adwaita ones, which might have some missing entries in there. Warpinator now supports IPv6 and sending text messages to other devices. Their package management suite has also been updated to handle installing multiple packages from an apt URL. And you'll also get a nice little icon in the system tray to tell you when you need to reboot your system after you decided to apply some updates. It's already out, you can already download it and install it. You probably also can perform an in-place upgrade from the previous version of Mint. They also refined the Wayland session in there, specifically supporting all the keyboard layouts and input methods you might want, which means that session is probably fully usable now, but you'll let me know in the comments if there are still some missing things compared to the scope of what Wayland supports. No need to report stuff that Wayland doesn't support, because no other desktop will have that either. Now, the Orion Browser, made by the developers of the Kagi search engine, is apparently being alpha tested, or at least that alpha testing phase will start soon for all Orion Plus subscribers, which are people who signed up in advance to support financially the development of the browser, and so they get to test it before anyone else. The beta version should arrive in about a month, apparently, and will be more widely available. As a reminder, this is a WebKit GTK-based browser with an interface that looks like a GNOME app, a libadwaita app. Linuxyak reports that this alpha works well currently with the basic features that you would expect, although extensions are not there yet. Syncing stuff through a profile is also absent right now, and of course you might experience crashes and issues because, of course, it is an alpha. Now, the goal of the browser is to have no telemetry, no data collection, no sponsorship or partnerships, nothing like that. They want to make money through a subscription model that gives you a few more features than the free version, gives you support, and all that kind of stuff. They've moved quite quickly on this browser. Now, of course, they use WebKit GTK, which is an already existing framework to access the WebKit engine, so that probably kickstarted development quite a bit. I'm not necessarily interested in the Orion browser itself, but more in what they add onto WebKit GTK, which will probably be open source, which can also be reused by stuff like GNOME Web, for example. If they manage to implement solid extension support and they make that code open source, it means GNOME Web could potentially also have access to that, and I'm more interested in a GNOME Web plus extensions browser than I am in Orion itself. Still, it's a new Linux browser that is neither Firefox based or Chromium based, so it is interesting to follow along, and of course I'll keep you posted when they publish new stuff, and if they release a beta soon, I'll give it a shot. Still on browsers, Firefox 147 was released this week with a few interesting changes. First, the browser now places their config files in the right directories. It now follows the freedesktop.org XDG base directory spec, meaning instead of having everything in a .mozilla folder, you have the config files in .config/mozilla, you have the data in .local/share/mozilla, and the cache in the .cache folder of your user directory. Existing installs will keep their storage scheme though, only new profiles and new installs will move to the new one, but at least in the future things will be where you would expect them to be on Linux. Now, second, on GNOME, Firefox will better support fractional scaling since the browser updates the window and the rendering surface sizes to match the actual pixel grid on your screen, so things shouldn't be blurry anymore. The picture-in-picture mode can now automatically activate when you switch away from a tab playing video. This was an experimental feature that is now available in the base browser settings. AMD users will also get a performance boost when playing videos, which means using Firefox on an AMD GPU will now have the same feature set as using it with Intel or Nvidia, should also save some battery life in the process. Pages should open faster when your connection is slow because Firefox supports compression dictionaries, which reduces how much data needs to be transferred to load a page. And the browser also adopted the Safe Browsing Protocol version 5. There are also some experimental stuff being worked on, an interesting one being the ability to change keyboard shortcuts with the detection of conflicts with other software that you might run. You will be able to enable that in the About Keyboard page. Now, I know I can be pretty tough on Firefox when Mozilla does yet another stupid thing or says another stupid thing or completely mishandles their entire communication, but these are the features I want to see in Firefox. Faster browsing, better UI, support for actual standards on Linux, better integration with our platform. These are good moves, so I'll be expecting them to land in the Firefox fork that I use currently, which is the horribly named Florp, but of course for all Firefox users, this is good. It's not AI crap that no one asked for, it's actual features that people rely upon and make your browsing better, so I think that's good. Now we have some bad news for Linux gamers this time around, as the Nexus mods app that was being worked on as a cross-platform application for Windows and Linux Well, this app has been abandoned. The Nexus mods team was working on two different apps. The older Vortex client, which is only made for Windows and supports a whole lot of games, and the Nexus mods app, which was a full rewrite with cross-platform support, including Linux games, and that was supposed to be the next thing that replaced Vortex when it was ready enough. They decided to drop that new version and to stick to the Windows-only one because they realized they were working on two different apps at the same time, adding the same features, duplicating work, duplicating bug fixes, and so they just decided to pick the one that already had the biggest user base. They also said Linux support for Vortex isn't really a thing they're going to focus on right now. They've been looking at what could be done, but they're only evaluating it on a game-per-game basis. There are no real plans, judging from what they are saying. Which sucks, because that was kind of a cool thing, to have a cross-platform mod manager that supports most games, at least. Well, at least in the future, it would have supported most games that ran on Linux. I also find it very weird as a reason, like you started a brand new client to replace the old one specifically to be cross-platform. So discovering after years of work that, hey, we're doing the same work twice. Yeah, maybe you should have just grabbed the people working on Vortex and put them all on the new client so it had all the features and you weren't duplicating work. I don't really know how that makes sense strategically to rediscover that you were working on two things when this was your initial plan. Anyway, you can still use mods. If you use your game on Steam, you have the Steam Workshop in a lot of titles. In others, you can just do a manual install. Some games have their own mod managers as well that only support that game specifically. A lot of those run on Proton, so you can run them on your games on Linux. But of course, having a single app that unifies all of this would have been pretty cool, and it looks like that's just not going to happen, at least not from Nexus mods. Now, the AMD GPU improvements for Linux never stop, it seems. There's yet another patch series being merged into Mesa to improve ray tracing performance again, this time for RDNA 3 cards and newer. This apparently gives smaller boosts than the previous ones. For example, Cyberpunk only seems to gain 1.88% better performance. Black Myth Wukong nets a 13.9% increase. Portal with RTX nets a 7.64% improvement. On top of that, there's another merge request that adds support for function calls for ray tracing, which apparently lets the RADV driver compile shaders separately instead of everything being lumped into a giant shader, which results in a 10 times speed boost for shader compilation on Unreal Engine 4 games. It also apparently completely removes stuttering when ray tracing pipelines were being compiled in-game. It also boosts performance in-game with ray tracing enabled. Apparently, Ghostwire Tokyo goes from 30 to 40 FPS on the developer's machine with a 7900 XT. And with these patch series and the previous ones that were already applied, it looks like the performance, at least for that specific game Ghostwire Tokyo, is on par between Linux and Windows with ray tracing enabled. And remember, we do have to run through translation layers for Proton, but also for DirectX and all of that stuff. So that is quite impressive. And of course, ray tracing is not ubiquitous. A lot of people just don't turn it on because it tanks your performance, whether it's on Windows or on Linux. I personally only started enabling it in select titles because I moved to a 9060 XT instead of my 6650 XT, and even on that new card, turning ray tracing on, if I try to push the details too high and resolution to 1440p with upscaling to 4K, generally performance isn't 60 FPS, it's still really rough. So not a lot of people will take a lot of benefit from those changes, but it does future-proof a lot of our driver stack. This is going to be important for the Steam machine, but for all Linux gamers as well, which seem to really favor AMD GPUs anyway, so that's fantastic work once again. And to conclude this episode, Wine 11 was released this week. It brings a fully complete WoW 64 mode, which stands for Windows on Windows 64, meaning the ability to run 32-bit Windows programs on 64-bit Wine, but also 16-bit programs, because this mode now supports 16-bit Windows programs. It also unifies the Wine loader for 64-bit and 32-bit, which makes me think that they feel this solution is completely ready now. There's also support for NT-Sync, which is the new driver that began, I think, in the kernel 6.13 or 14, something like that, and it significantly boosts performance over using Wine without NT-Sync. Wine 11 also handles thread priority for Linux, it adds support for symbolic links, and a bunch of kernel-level features too that should help with Windows compatibility. There are also ARM64 improvements, they also moved to a hardware-accelerated OpenGL runtime, and of course they support Vulkan 1.4. The experimental Wayland driver now supports shaped windows and color-keyed windows. They also support the clipboard using different input methods, and it boasts better performance than its initial experimental implementation from Wine 10. It is still experimental though, so there's no telling when they'll make that the default, maybe in a year with Wine 12. They also improved their own Direct3D API, which you probably don't use if you use Proton, because it just uses DXVK and all of that stuff instead. There's much better support for input devices as well, for scanners, for Bluetooth devices. In short, it is a major yearly update with a ton of stuff in it. It will be interesting to see what this brings for Proton 11, because of course Proton 11 will be based on Wine 11. We'll see which performance benefits, which compatibility benefits it brings, but as always, this feels like complete magic to me to be able to run so many Windows programs on Linux, so as always, fantastic work from the Wine developers. And as always, fantastic work from our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. You all know what they do by now. They are the only computer manufacturer that I rely upon these days. They're based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world. And of course, the main advantage is that they make computers that ship with Linux out of the box, meaning all the hardware is highly compatible with Linux. They even contribute directly to the Linux kernel a bunch of fixes and little drivers that they build to support the light bars, the keyboard backlight color changers, and all of that stuff. They have a wide range of devices. You'll find any price point, any form factor in there. You have plenty of keyboard layouts that you can choose from. You can have your own logo engraved on the lid of your laptop. Basically, they have everything. I only use their stuff. They're really, really good. And so, of course, you can find the link down in the description. Anyway, this will conclude this video. I hope you enjoyed listening to it or watching it or whatever else you did. Click all those YouTube buttons. You know why that is important, especially in January, because that month absolutely sucks on YouTube every time. So do click the like, subscribe, whatever else buttons if you want to do so. You'll also have plenty of links to support the channel down in the descriptions. Go check them out. You can get some nice little perks like a daily version of this show if you want. And I guess that's it. So thank you all for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!